Shades Anachronistos Warhammer Fantasy Lore. Good day, Shades here. Something a little bit different for this video, I think. I recently acquired a new bookcase, and almost instantly it was filled to the brim with all of my Warhammer Black Library fiction, my Warhammer Fantasy Black Library fiction. Hundreds of books that range from the 80s to, relatively recently. Books collected over many years. One of my earliest videos, it actually showed off much of this collection, but going through these books again has given me the idea to make it now more of a video, more of a sort of what I feel could be an important video, helping people decide whether to read these books or not, and talking about how they fit into the Warhammer world. So, going through each of these books in turn, briefly giving sort of my opinion of them, and whether they sort of get my stamp of approval. Hopefully this will be of use to anyone thinking of giving the book that I may be talking about a read. Also I hope to I'm getting a bit distracted. Bloody cat again, always cats getting in the way of my videos. I swear they want to be famous. They're trying to upstage me. Anyway, what was I saying? Yes. The two things that I want to get from this video is that I hope to, maybe persuade people to read certain books if they're not sure about them. Tell them which books that I'm interested in and think are worth reading. But also, because I have books ranging from the 80s, I also want to show people books that they may be unaware of. So that is the idea behind this new line of videos. I'll still be answering questions in my other playlist, but I think this could be really fun and really interesting, so let's give it a go. Naturally, it's worth saying that this is my personal opinions, and other people may disagree and have different tastes. I hope many do. It keeps things interesting, and I would love to hear about other people's opinions in the comments. Friendly debate is always a good thing, bringing different points of view into the mix and adding to overall understanding. This is my polite way of saying, please don't be mean to me. So, let us begin with probably the most famous duo of heroes in all Warhammer fantasy fiction. A simple man of the Empire, a student of Altdorf, and a dwarf slayer. A dwarf that is possibly one of the most powerful characters in all of Black Library fiction. I am, of course, talking about the adventures of Gotrek and Felix. Anybody with an interest with the fantasy side of Black Library fiction will have heard about all the books containing the many adventures of Gotrek and Felix. In fact, it would be quite possible to make a video many hours long, going into depth into the detail of these two heroes, and that's not an exaggeration. and certainly one could go on for who knows how long talking about their many adventures, and who knows, maybe one day I might embark on such a project. But that is not what this video is all about. So, as hard as it seems, the plan is to go through each book individually, giving a little description and my thoughts on its quality and whether it's worth checking out and buying. With these old Black Library books at a premium price, even second hand. I mean, I just had a look on Amazon, and second hand used, most of these books are going for around £20, and these are the $6.99 paperbacks. So they're very expensive books at the moment, now that Black Library stopped selling them. And I think it's, I hope it's reassuring to learn a little bit about them before you buy. Now, being such a popular series, there are many other series that spin off from the core Gotrek and Felix books. Just off the top of my head, you have Ulrika the Vampire, you have Gracie Thanquol, everyone's favourite Skaven. You've got things like that. However, let's first dive into the main series, containing 13 novels. Now, cleverly, to tie each book together, each novel has a very similar name. It tends to contain the main enemy, followed by the word Slayer. Therefore, the list reads as follows. We have Troll Slayer, Skaven Slayer, and Demon Slayer, which are all part of the first omnibus. As you can see, this book has had a lot of use in its time. But that's the first 3 stories. I have them all in omnibus form, so that's
You're listening to
how I'm going to display them. But that's the first omnibus. Next, we have Dragon Slayer, Beast Slayer, and Vampire Slayer, and they are all in the second omnibus. There it is. Second omnibus. We also have Giant Slayer, which is the first book in the third omnibus. I've unfortunately misplaced the third omnibus at the moment, which is a real pain because Giant Slayer is probably my favourite Gotrek and Felix story, so I'll have to hunt that omnibus down. It's really frustrating. Anyway, now we're going to pause the list there for just a second, as these first 7 novels, Troll Slayer, Skaven Slayer, Demon Slayer, Dragon Slayer, Beast Slayer, Vampire Slayer, Giant Slayer. Now, these 7 novels were written by the same author. The author who originally had the idea for the series, and whose brilliance made their adventures the most popular of all the Black Library fantasy series. That author is the legendary William King. By the way, I may not have the third omnibus to hand, but what I do have is, I think, a beautifully painted figure of Gotrek. This is a very old figure. It's from the late 80s when the game was in its earliest days, so it's made of lead. but I'm very proud of this one. I think it's beautifully painted, and I hope you agree. So just thought if there was ever going to be a chance for me to show this model off, focus, it would be in a video like this. So there we go. A multi-award winning fantasy author and one of my personal favourites. In my opinion, I call this the golden age of the series. It was after Giant Slayer that Mr. King decided to move on from the series he created and made blossom. If Gotrek and Felix were to continue their adventures, the next author had some very large boots to fill. One hell of a daunting task. That task fell to another very accomplished and experienced fantasy writer, an author by the name of Nathan Long. When he took over in 2006, the series had already been going for 7 years and had accumulated a huge fan base. Nathan Long carried on the tradition of titling the books like William King had done before him, and what followed were Orc Slayer and Manslayer, which finished off my missing third omnibus. However, his next 3 books were contained within the 4th omnibus, which I, as you can see, do have. And these books were Elf Slayer, Shaman Slayer, and Zombie Slayer. I refer to this as the Silver Age of Gotrek and Felix. It was clear from the style of writing that Nathan Long wasn't attempting to simply imitate his predecessor. He certainly took inspiration, but it was clear after the first couple of chapters of Orc Slayer that the writing was of a different flavour. I think this was definitely the way to go. Nathan Long was a well-established author with a large fan base of his own, and he certainly made some changes, bringing his own flavour to his own novels. For me personally, I've always preferred the work of William King when it came to this particular series. Only this particular series, that is, as I very much respect Nathan Long as a writer as well. Now, after Zombie Slayer had been complete, there was a considerable break in terms of the main storyline, and it looked as if Gotrek and Felix adventures were going to end on a sour and rather unsatisfying note. However, a couple of books were released bearing the names of our 2 heroes. They were, however, quite different to the epic saga that had come before. In 2012 came a rather diminutive book bearing the title Gotrek and Felix, the Anthology. I shall just track it down. Oh, I'm always coming prepared. Here it is. As you can see, it's just a little book there. This stopped making the omnibuses by this point. Now, this was edited, but it wasn't written by another well-known author within the fantasy genre, and that was Christian Dunn. This book, as the title hinted at, was a collection of short stories written by a variety of different authors. Some were known, many of them were virtually unknown, at least to me. All the stories involved our 2 heroes in one way or another, However, being a collection of short stories put together in a rather random way for the first time, this meant that Gotrek and Felix diverged from its well-established timeline. For me personally, this was a bit of an issue. I saw the Gotrek and Felix series as one of the great fantasy epics, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Each novel following on from where the previous one had ended, and I rectified this issue in my mind, this is just personally, by viewing the anthology as if it were stories written by writers actually within the Warhammer world, inspired by the growing fame of our two heroes, which was always something that had been played upon in the original works. They were growing famous within the fantasy world. This is my way of dealing with the timeline discrepancies, and that's just of importance to me. It always has been, but perhaps not to others. Maybe taking it a little bit too seriously. Following the anthology, good news appeared to be on the horizon. A new Gotrek and Felix novel fitting within the timeline and following on from Zombie Slayer. Supposedly this was in the works. And in 2013, 3 years after Zombie Slayer, we get a new author, very well known and respected, and he released the next full novel, which was called Gotrek and Felix and the Road of Skulls, written by Josh Reynolds. I don't want to say too much, as part 2 of this video is where I give my opinions on each separate novel, but what I will say is, firstly, as you've probably noticed, the title doesn't follow on from the other books. Understandable, as I suppose there's only so many things, so many monsters you can slay. I certainly would be running out of ideas. Secondly though, this book for me is where things began to go wrong with Gotrek and Felix. The beginning of the end. Certainly for me the weakest in the series so far. The timeline is messy, supposedly now taking place early on in the epic, just after Skaven Slayer, rather than pushing forwards with the story following Zombie Slayer. And I think many others kind of expected more. But anyway, we'll have more of that in part 2. Now, I try to always be honest with my viewers, and I'm afraid this is where I have a confession to make. I decided to start this Black Library series with Gotrek and Felix, not only because it's so well known, but also because I was under the impression that I had read and owned every book in this series. But when preparing for this video that late on, I was in for a little bit of a surprise, having uploaded a list of every book just to sort of tick them off so that I didn't miss any out. After the Road of Skulls, which I previously mentioned, 2 titles of books appeared that I had never even heard of before. They were called City of the Damned by David Geimer and The Serpent Queen, again by Josh Reynolds. Let's just say for now that the books are ordered and I have a lot of reading to do before part 2 of this video. I'm hoping they bring our heroes back to prime form, but I do have my doubts. Still, maybe that's something someone might want to comment on. although please don't spoil it for me. Now we finish off part 1 of this video, outlining the scope of Gotrek and Felix and creating a comprehensive list of the great saga with Warhammer Fantasy's Last Breath. The much loathed yet inevitable end times. Naturally, our most well-known heroes had to play a crucial role in this controversial period of Warhammer history. And on the positive side of things, we do plough forward back in our original timeline. In fact, we move very far forward indeed. The titles of these last 2 books also reflect this return to form. It looks like there are things left to slay, after all. We have Kin Slayer. These are lovely quality hardback books, by the way. I must say, as time went on, the quality of the books was really improved. So we have Kinslayer, which is also, it's got the foreboding subtitle of being Book 1 of the Doom of Gotrek Guernsey. Any fan of the series thought they'd never probably hear those words. So we have Kinslayer, and then we have our final book, and it has the most simple title of all. It's Book 2 of the Doom of Gotrek Guernsey, and it is simply called Slayer. Both these books, Kinslayer and Slayer, are written by David Geimer, hope I'm pronouncing that right, and despite having a go at the end times concept whenever I get the chance in any of my videos, my views on these 2 final books within the great fantasy epic may just surprise you. It certainly surprised me. So, believe it or not, this has supposedly been my brief introduction into the Gotrek and Felix novels. There is just so much to outline with this series. Now, in part 2, we can briefly sink our teeth into each of these novels that I've outlined in this video. At least now we have our structure. The idea of going through all the Black Library fantasy books, briefly chatting about each of them, is not to do any kind of full reviews. That may come in the future, if the demand is there. It would definitely be a challenge, a humongous undertaking. What I intend to do is to just briefly comment on each book in my in my bursting bookcase that I've just received, and just give my personal recommendations and what I like and what I don't like. So, in part 2 of this video, we will systematically go through each book in this grand epic, following its ups and downs, and I'll say a few words and give my recommendations on each one. I hope this project is of interest to people, and if anyone has any input on these novels that you think I should explore, please do leave your views and ideas in the comments section. I want to give a bit of time to hopefully allow that to happen, because it's a new thing I'm embarking upon, and advice is always welcome. And I always want to include you guys and your thoughts as much as possible. The groundwork, I like that, I said that's a Freudian slip, but it worked. The groundwork and the groundwork has been laid, and in part 2, we're going to fill that in. Cheers. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and I will be seeing you again with another video very soon. This is Shades, signing off.